Hello, I'm going to talk about how I handle my bass guitars right now. Most of the time, I will have multiple sources of bass guitar and even synth bass coming into me. So I like to do some specific things to manage that. Um, a lot of the times, my overall approach to it is I will take my individual channels and process them as needed for that particular moment, that particular song, that particular set that day. Then I send them out to a mono bus where I do a little bit of group processing, and then from that out to the main PA. So let's dive in and see how I approach this specifically. Most of the time, my base one input is going to be a tube DI. Most of the time, I try to get a ready DI. It's got a built-in tube and volume knob on it, so you can set some levels and tone on stage from the source. I will also at the same time bring in a Sans amp so that I can have on my second bass channel some overdrive and a little bit of dirt and grit to it. And then if a lot of the music we do is dancey and synthy, so we actually will have a synth bass, in this case the Moog channel. So how I approach each of these two, specifically bass 1 and 2, I try to set my head amp and gain so that I have a pretty healthy level, and I try to actually bring them up so that sonically they're approximately the same volume. That may mean that my head amp on my Sans amp channel is a lot lower because it's overdriven and it's just producing more sound, or the tube on that particular day on bass 1 could be a lot louder. So what I'm trying to do is generate these to be about the same sonic level. That way I can use my faders to actually mix them throughout the course of the event and not have to constantly be changing gain. The Muga Fugger, I will actually generally set it a little higher in gain than I would the bass because it generally is putting out mostly subsonic frequencies, and the sound system is going to have to work a little harder to produce those. When it comes to my approach on EQing for my bass 1, I will try to cut out a lot of this high stuff. As I said, I do a lot of dancier synthesizer music right now, and this gets in the way of a lot of the information coming from other instruments and pre-recorded tracks, so I just kind of roll that off. My low mid, I will use to either thin out or thicken up the bass guitar. Given player, different pickups, I get a lot of different things. This is where it can either sound really, really boxy, like a 1970s recording before hi-fi was invented, or inversely, it can sound really, really thin and not have a lot of presence in the mix. This frequency right here, between 140 and 250, is a really important frequency range in the bass. If you have a lot of the subsonic frequency but not a lot of the body, you're not going to really hear any note value. So I will really work with these two to make sure that my bass sounds holistically even and thick and full in presence. My bass 2, I use this one. I don't bring any low information in here because it's going to be overdriven, it's going to be distorted in a lot of cases, and I don't want it causing any phase problems with my bass. I want my bass to be nice and thick and pure. And then in the instances where I do choose to bring in the overdrive for a given song, I want it to not affect that. I just want to be able to add presence in the highs and the mids and really get it to buzz. Depending on the song and depending on what the guitars will do, I will boost and cut up in here to make the different overtones and harmonics really come and go with this. Um, this one, you have to be very mindful of what the electric guitars are doing. It's definitely not a set and forget situation here. I'll ride this in any given song that I'm using it. With the synth bass, I generally won't do a whole lot of EQing in the synth bass at all. This is just a preset I have so that I can see those as my start point. I will, however, use my low frequency here, is in a very thin, as thin as I will allow me to do, and I will look for the frequency that that particular room is resonating at. Every room will have a note that the subs will lock in and resonate at, and I will try to minimize that note specifically so that the entire subsonic range in general can be big and reproduced and not have that one note that just overpowers the rest. If you notice, I have a high pass here. I always set this about 30 hertz. If it's a really big system and the subs are really big, I may go down to 25. But rule of thumb, I always set at 30. Um, those frequencies that are below that at 100 dB or higher are just going to eat up your sound system's headroom, and it's going to damage your subs even. So I just roll them off. It's not even worth having them. From that point, I bring all of these to my mono subgroup for my bass instruments. On my bass channel, again, I have a compressor. This compressor, I'm trying to just use this to keep it in line with my drums. It's it's not truly doing any compression here. It's just more of a last ditch effort if something gets out of hand. And the EQ is the same way. I generally won't do any EQ here unless, halfway through the night something's changed and I want to just kind of take everything out of all of it at once. I will do it right here on my bass group. This is also where I feed my left, right, and my subs. I do this here instead of from the channel. That way, if I do any compression or EQing here, my full range line arrays and my subs stay in phase with each other. As far as my approach to compression and gating on these channels themselves, the gate I have set just high enough that it's only closed when they're not playing these. It's just to get rid of any accidental background noise that might be on the channel. Compression, uh, I use a relatively low amount. I use usually 3 to 5 to 1, depending on the particular player. I bring my threshold down so that I'm hitting, maybe 1 to 2 dB of compression as a constant while they're playing, and then it only truly reduces if they really dig in. And I'll try to get that with my attack and release.